Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Old Man Rambles. Everything's getting long. It's not what I want to talk about. um, it seems that Graham Platner has won the Democratic primary for the Senate race for the state of Maine. And I do want to talk about that a little bit. But before that, I want to say that this is not an endorsement of Graham Platner. I will not say that I'm voting for him. I will not say that I support him. These are observations and opinions. So, prior to the election, the primary election, that is, there were 4 Democratic candidates. Janet Mills dropped out. Another guy whose name I can't remember, and LaFlame. I think his name was LaFlame. Janet Mills, after dropping out, still got 20% of the vote, and that's just stupid. That 20% of the Democratic voters voted for someone who was no longer running. That's just... If you didn't like Platt, you could have voted for some of the other two. I mean, from what I've heard, I think LaFlame would have been a good, interesting choice. I don't know as much about her. I don't know anything about the other guy. I think he got like 8% of the vote, and LaFlame got 0.5%. So, and Platner got the rest of the Democratic votes. And given the controversies that surround him, it is somewhat surprising that he got so much of the vote, that he pretty much completely overtook Janet Mills in her campaign. And I want to address some of those things. Old information has surfaced about his comments about women, his comments about the queer community, his comments about rural Mainers. He's made some wildly sexist and homophobic comments. He said that rural Mainers are stupid and racist. Having grown up in rural Maine myself, having lived in that community, I grew up in a town of 5,000 people in mid-coast Maine. Those things are true. Rural Mainers are stupid and racist. This is not to say like the entire community, every single person there is, but there's a lot of stupid people in rural Maine. My elementary class, from kindergarten through 8th grade, was approximately the same 36 people, and about 20% of them needed help in class. That's rural Maine. And my experience was not unique to the other schools in that area. There's a lot of stupid people in Maine. And again, that doesn't mean they're all stupid. There are plenty of intelligent people in rural Maine, but there's also a lot of stupid people. And growing up, I can't speak for today, but yeah, there was a lot of casual racism when I grew up in the state of Maine. Again, that does not mean they're all racist and they're all stupid, but there's definitely enough of the population to count. It's not a minority, or at least not a small minority. So him and I are in agreement on that. But and his other comments as well. And I see a lot of attack ads about him saying these things. And some of the things he says are true. But I've watched a lot of interviews with him. Not a lot. I've watched a couple interviews with him, and I've read at least one written interview, someone who interviewed him and then wrote an article about him. And the man in those interviews does not match the angry, misogynistic, younger man who is in the posts and the things that he has done. He does seem to have turned his life around if we take him at face value. I'm not saying you should. But taking him at his word at face value, he has owned up to his statements, denied some. owned up to some of the accusations and denied some of the accusations. You know, if you take him at face value, he was angry after returning from combat. He had untreated PTSD. He said a lot of things. He has grown as a person since then. And that can be true. I look at the things I have said and done myself in the past, things of which I am ashamed of, that I said and did, and attitudes that I had. You know, again, growing up in rural Maine, you know, I was raised by my parents to be one kind of person, to be, you know, a good person. But when you are surrounded by all these people who speak and say these things, you wind up absorbing some of it, you know, completely unintentionally. But yeah, I did absorb a lot of homophobic and racist attitudes just from the community that I was in. Things that I didn't necessarily believe, but they were still there in my head and still would occasionally come out, you know. And when I realized what I was doing and what I was saying, when I finally paid attention to what I was doing and saying, I tried to change. And it is possible Graham Platner has done that. I don't know that he has, but it's possible. And I think that may have been at least some of the reason he is running as popular as he is. I know some of the reasons also the messaging that he has done. He is not beholden to anyone with money. He has political backing. Obviously, he couldn't get where he is without it. But he doesn't have any baggage. You know, the people that are supporting him, I have no idea who they are at the moment. But at present, he does not have any real ties to anyone that would prevent him from voting with his conscience. And and the things he is saying is resonating with a lot of people in the state of Maine. The fact that there are big companies from out of state coming to the state of Maine and throwing their weight around, throwing their money around, and pushing around the people who have made their lives here for decades and squeezing them out. And the people here are feeling the pinch, and they don't like it. And for better or for worse, Graham Platner seems like one of those people. You know, the people who are supporting him seem like he feels like, you know, he understands what they're going through. He understands their problems, their pains, their frustrations, and he is willing to at least say he's willing to vote for them. Now, I've spoken in the past how I do not trust Susan Collins because she has gone back on her word too many times. Not to Republicans. She very, very, very rarely bucks the Republican line with her votes. She will verbally say, did my screensavers go on? I have not been away from my desk for that long, or talking for that long. Anywho, as I was saying, I don't trust Susan Collins because she has gone back on her word, usually to progressives and leftists, where she says she'll vote in line with their goals and then just does the Republican Party line anyway. She's done that too many times for me to trust her, trust her at her word. So I think a lot of people, especially on the left, feel the same frustration with me or share my frustration with Susan Collins about that aspect of her political career, that she's untrustworthy, that she's just going to vote party line 99% of the time. But to compare Susan Collins and Graham Platner, another thing that I think is, in my opinion, is pushing his campaign to be as successful as it is that Graham Platner is doing something that none of the other candidates did at all. He is reaching out to the minority communities in the state of Maine, which, to the best of my knowledge, none of the other ones have done. Not even Susan Collins. When ICE was trying to make its presence known in the state of Maine, and certain communities were worried about that, Graham Platner reached out to the leaders of those communities to make sure they were okay. At the time that this occurred, he was traveling with his wife for in vitro fertilization treatments. He was not here. He was doing something important to his family. And he took time out of his personal life to contact people in Maine communities to make sure they were okay. He is sitting down with people in coffee shops, in town halls, out in the open. He has boots on the ground. And I don't just mean he has people with boots on the ground to campaign. He is actively out in Maine communities. He's not just doing fancy interviews on talk shows and podcasts and for websites and stuff like that. He is boots on the ground, walking around the state of Maine, driving around the state of Maine, and talking to people in their communities live and in person. And that's going to speak to people. Susan Collins isn't doing that. I don't think anyone, I don't think Janet Mills is doing anything. Now, granted, Susan Collins is currently a senator. Janet Mills is currently the governor. They are doing things. They have other quote unquote responsibilities. But the people of Maine don't feel heard by Susan Collins. And they didn't feel heard by Janet Mills. But they're being heard by Graham Platner. And from where I sit, that will get him a lot of support in the state of Maine. I won't say whether or not we'll get my support. I have not sat down and talked with the man, and there are still issues with some of the things he said and potentially done. But for better or for worse, he's what the Democrats have to vote for. And if you are a Republican wondering how the people of the state of Maine can vote for a man like Graham Platner, I ask you to look at all the people who voted for Donald Trump, who has said and done as much, if not more, worse than what Graham Platner has done. And if you have supported Donald Trump, you have no reason to criticize people who are supporting Graham Platner. Good hunting.